Alright, update 41, Magic Warden. Honestly, the skills of this build have not changed that much. Well, you will see a slight increase in power from certain things and a slight decrease in power from certain things. Um, I really like this Warden build. It's my lazy Warden build. I do think I might add more max health, but I don't know. The max mag is kind of nice for damage, especially because I lack in damage. So, going over the race, because that is important. I honestly would never recommend playing Magic Warden on anything but a Breton. Magic Warden sustain is quite shit. So having the 7% cost reduction to all of your abilities, in addition to that little bit of extra magic recovery, is quite nice. Also, with spell attunement, you'll be getting your spell resistance up really high because everyone uses Elisus. It's great in PvP. The max mag increase by 2k is nice. You know, a little extra resources, a little extra damage, but it's not that much. A lot of people will use stuff like Draugr King or Dragon's Appetite, I think it is, but I found a different set that I quite enjoy using. As a mythic, I'm using Marken Ring of Majesty, Balrog, because of course Balrog is very good, Trainee's Chess Piece, and Rallying Cry Ice Staff on back bar. You're going to be using Ice Staff for both bars. Charged did receive a bit of a nerf. I might change that, but because of how this build is, I still think Charged is the way to go for now. I will update this build if I feel that is different, but for now, I'm going with that. And the main damage set, as you can see here, I'm actually using Scathing Mage. Yeah, I have a lot of Scathing Mage from when it was BIS for Nightblade back in 2017, and it's just kind of been sitting in my bank because it's not that good of a set anymore. It's kind of like Burning Spellwave, but for direct damage. Generally, in the past, the reason it was used for Magic Nightblade is because Twisting Path, for some reason, despite being a dot, would proc it. And so it could get very high uptime. Additionally, you can still get pretty high uptime just by using Force Pulse. Force Pulse plus the direct damage dealt by Deep Fissure, when you combo those all together, you have a high proc chance. The reason I do like this set is not only does it just suddenly give you a fuck ton of damage, and that can surprise your opponents, is because this number will carry over to your back bar. When you're on the defensive, I find that it does not proc as often because, you know, you're going to be on your back bar more often. But, you know, when it's defensive, or when you're defensive, its uptime is roughly 60%, which isn't nothing, and it does affect your healing. But when you're on the offensive, the uptime is upwards of 80%, which is definitely enough to be worth it, especially for the amount of damage that it does grant you. It's kind of a weird set. No one really uses it anymore. Kind of annoying to get because the dungeon is really long. It used to be really hard, but it's just long now. Overall, give it a try. Let me know what you think. I'm very proud of it. I quite like it. It's very original. As for these skills, we have Deep Fissure as our main burst damage. I suck at Warden. Generally, I take a pretty lazy approach to this class. That's why I call it the Lazy Warden. You have so much damage mitigation and healing. You just kind of go around, heavy attack, do some damage. I'm not quite that good at getting kills. This build usually works best with a duo just because I suck. If you're actually good at Warden, you will be dominating with this setup. Main spammable Force Pulse. This is important. You could use Pigeon Spam, i.e., was it Cutting Dive? I don't remember what it's called anymore. Screaming Cliff Racer. You could use that if you wanted. It does give you a nice little damage buff, and it sets enemies off balance. But because we have Scathing Mage, we want Force Pulse. You may consider, why are we using Force Pulse? It costs much more than if we were using Crushing Shock. Well, my dears, let me tell you. Reason we're using Force Pulse is not just Scathing Mage. Similar reason, and Scathing Mage is the reason we're not using the Psijic skill. The damage we get, you know, penetrating magic, we get a little bit of extra damage. That's going to be roughly 3% extra damage because it cuts through resistances. But we also want increased chance to apply status effects. That's a big part of this build. Status effects are a big part of this build. Ancient Knowledge, we get the blocking thing. As I said, Magicka Sustain's kind of ass, so I'm not the biggest fan of that, but whatever, it works. And then we have the the regen after the shield restore. But having Force Pulse, we're going to get the additional chance to proc status effects because of the Destruction Staff stuff, as well as the ability to cut through enemy armor, and Psijic skill line just does not give that. But the big kicker is that Force Pulse is an AoE ability. If you have multiple opponents that are affected with status effects, and they are within a certain radius, I think it's 8 meters, yeah, then there will be an arcing beam that does damage to all of them. This build is very good at 1vx for that reason, because you can effectively do high damage to multiple opponents. Well, how do we get these status effects on them so that they do bounce back and forth? Well, one, of course, you can use Force Pulse. That will apply status effects. Additionally, Growing Swarm. It will apply minor vulnerability, which increases their damage taken, but the bleed has a chance to proc, Hemorrhage, I believe, which is a pretty good ability. So that bleed duration, and it's in a 5-meter radius around that target, will help with applying status effects. Additionally, Arctic Blast is a AoE ability. This is probably your main heal, honestly. It's not the best heal, but Warden has so much healing that it can afford to have kind of a meh heal. But this is also your stun. It's a little bit awkward, but it does damage every 2 seconds in an area around you, and it has a very high chance to apply the chilled status effect. Because of Arctic Blast, it says the damage has a higher effect to apply the chilled status effect. In addition to that, we have a charge staff on our front bar, so that is AoE application of that effect. It used to be almost 100% chance to apply chilled. Now, because they changed how charged works, it's going to be slightly lower, but we have so many other sources of status effects that we're still going to be able to put out a pretty high amount of damage. In addition to that, we have, where is it? Glacial Presence. Increase the chance of applying chilled to enemies with Winter's Embrace abilities by 200%. So not only does this just have a higher chance because it's native to the skill, it also has a higher chance because of this very aspect. This will also increase the damage of our chilled status effects, so, not something to scoff at. You might think, well, we could just use Elissus. We can dot everyone up with Elissus. Yeah, well, this already gives you the breach benefit, or the breach bonuses that you need. So Elissus is kind of useless unless you just want the status effects. And sure, you would have more consistency and you can line things up easier if you're a bit of a control freak. I am, but it's just more effective to cross your fingers because status effects will eventually proc. I am constantly seeing Force Pulse jump between multiple opponents. So in addition to Growing Swarm, Arctic Blast, Deep Fissure, Force Pulse, literally everything here on my front bar, except for Bird of Prey, of course, it doesn't do any damage. Everything, including my ultimate, is a frontal attack. Although I guess this is targeted and this is like around you, but it is a AoE attack. And so a lot of your damage is undodgeable. Of course, the application of Fetcher Fly and the if you're targeting a dodging target with Force Pulse, they will be able to dodge it. It's just the beam AoE part that they probably won't be able to dodge. So, but they also can't dodge your burst either. Not something to scoff at. And then you can combine that all with Dawnbreaker. It's pretty classic for you to time Shulks with Dawnbreaker, but assuming you have the status effects on your opponents, especially if you have Arctic Blast active, then you'll hit Dawnbreaker, and then you'll go right into Force Pulse spam, which will keep up your Scaling Mage, if not already proc it, which makes you do more damage, and then the beams will jump between opponents. Sometimes you can just stack a lot of people together and blow them up, and oh my god, it is so satisfying. This build also works in Battlegrounds. But let's take a look at the back bar abilities. Of course, I saw we have Dawnbreaker here and Bird of Prey here. This will give us minor Berserk, but it also gives us a mobility option. Blue Betty, the best but also worst sustained skill in the game. Why is it the worst? Well, it does not sustain you very well. Why is it the best? Because it purges you every 5 seconds, and you get a small heal on cast. So if I'm kind of running away from people, I'm not being immediately attacked, but I have like a bunch of damage over time effects on me, I can just spam Betty Netch. I'll get a tiny heal, and I will purge all the dot effects. Every time you cast it, it will purge the dot effect. Additionally, for more survivability, basically everything on this back bar is utility and survivability. Northern Storm is also a good supplement for Dawnbreaker. I will talk about Northern Storm when we get there. Leeching Vines. This gives us a heal when we take damage, occurs every 1 second, but it also applies minor lifesteal, which is just a lot of passive healing for you and the Zerglings around you. What's not to like? Vigor is a heal that we use for the heal, but also because of the minor resolve. And then we have Ice Fortress, which gives us our major armor buff. All the way buffed up, we are at 31k spell resistance and 36 physical resistance. Of course, when we get hit with Elisus, this is going to go up to like 33 or 34k, so we're not going to take much spell damage. Although it will also go down because Elisus has the penetration component to it. Additionally, we have Lotus Blossom. This is for our crit buff. Also, when we do a heavy attack, it will restore roughly 2k health. So when you have that, and if you're low on magic and you do a heavy attack, you're going to get a 2k heal after that, in addition to the shield that Ice Staff gives you, and any other heal over time effects you have going on. So you can take a more relaxed approach to combat with this build, because you can just be slow. You can think. You can try to outthink your opponent, as opposed to playing Nightblade, where I have to, sweat like crazy and to try and do anything. So why do I have Northern Storm here? Well, for one, Northern Storm gives major protection. It's a nice little benefit. In addition, the damage it does isn't half bad, and the reduction in movement speed is definitely valuable if you're trying to keep people around you. But the two main reasons I use Northern Storm is because of the damage buff to your stats it gives you, in addition to proccing Chilled. If you're worried about your status effects being procced on your opponents, Northern Storm, and then go for the kill. Dawnbreaker is generally better. It's a stun, does more burst damage, but the damage over time component is helpful too. And of course you have the Slayer buff. Where is it? Slayer Fighters Guild. 3% extra spell and weapon damage, but generally, if I want to kill a large stack of people, I'm going to be using Northern Storm. If it's just like 2 people, 1 people, I'll probably use Dawnbreaker Smiting, but Northern Storm, because it gives you that weapon and spell damage buff, and because of the Warden passive, Glacial Presence, it will have a higher chance to apply Chilled, and thus make sure that your opponents are properly debuffed for you to do damage to them. I think that covers everything. I'll go over like food and Mundus. So food, I'm using Jewels of Misrule. Big surprise. Most PvP builds are using Jewels of Misrule. I am using the Thief because crit is a little low. This is not a really crit-focused build, or crit-focused class even. But I have my crit at an acceptable level, which is 42%. Anything below 40, and it doesn't feel right. So one of the reasons I want this is because it makes my heals crit as well as my damage. So, keep that in mind. As for other stats, we've got Ironclad. Why is this not? There we go. Ironclad is going to reduce the direct damage we take, and a lot of damage in PvP is, in fact, direct damage. Duelist rebuff is going to reduce our single target attack damage taken, so, a lot of direct damage is single target damage. That'll help. Fighting Finesse. This is going to increase our crit, healing, and crit damage. I'm on the fence about this because we only have 42k crit, but it's kind of enough that I think it is beneficial to have. You could switch this out to something else, though, if you wanted. Mastered Arms is our, increased direct damage done by 3%, so that's 6% additional direct damage. That's just going to be buffing most of our forms of damage. As for red CP, I have Relentless, Pain's Refuge. Pain's Refuge is kind of mandatory in PvP because just there's a lot of debuffs around. So let's take Elisus. Elisus applies the Breach, which is 1 debuff, and then we have Chilled, Concussed, and Fire. That's 4. So 4 debuffs. That's already up to 8%. We already get 8% damage mitigation just for having someone cast Elisus on us, and people are casting Elisus on us all the fucking time. So Pain's Refuge, absolutely an amazing thing, kind of required. Rejuvenation, just it's nice for extra recovery, and Warden struggles with that anyways. Relentlessness is just, it's nice to not die. Sometimes animations will be a little wonky, and you won't realize that you're stunned because the game is trying to play multiple animations at once, so you just stand here like a dead fish when in fact you are stunned. You can also install an add-on for that. I use my CC tracker because I had to install an add-on because the animations were not showing for me anymore. Fortified just gives you a little extra armor. You could change this up as you want. It's nice. As for green CP, for Cyrodiil, you definitely want Steed's Blessings and, Gifted Rider. They're nice. As everything else, it does not matter. I do Rationer. You also have Master Gatherer because I like to pick stuff up. But you can do, Liquid Efficiency. That one's pretty good. Speaking of Liquid Efficiency, we use tripods. I actually have a big stock of these crown tripods in the bank. And then I also make tripods because, I can. Making tripods is, of course, more expensive, so having access to tripods just through the crown store is kind of nice. Don't fucking buy potions. Please, I'm begging you, don't buy potions off the crown store. Buy them in-game. Grind out the gold. It's fine. They're not worse, per se. I think they used to be worse. I think they're about the same. Oh, excuse me, they're 0.5 seconds worse. It gives you, I believe, the same amount of resources, but the regeneration buffs that you get, this one lasts 0.5 seconds less. But economically speaking, it's nice to kind of supplement your actual source of tripods with just crown store tripods, so you don't have to worry about spending money all the time, because tripods are expensive. I think that covers everything for this build. If you have questions, feel free to leave them down below. I'm happy to answer. This is a build that I'm proud of because it's unique, but it also works pretty well, and it's unique. So yeah, if you're a newer player, I would honestly recommend this build. The light attack weaving is not as important as it is for Nightblade, for instance, and you can take it slow. You have the tank ability to just not sweat super hard and just take it slow and think things out. So you don't have to worry about it quite as much. A lot of people will do 1-bar builds. If you don't want to do a 1-bar build, like I refuse to grind out Oaken Soul, but I know a lot of newer players will prefer 1-bar builds. Honestly, I think light attack weaving is more complicated than bar swapping. So to all the people out there who are doing 1-bar builds, use Velothi Amulet instead of Oaken Soul, because it's not worth it, in my opinion. You lose out on so much utility, especially in PvP. In PvE, it can kind of work, but try new things. Learn things, embrace your options. But yeah, that is the Warden build, my beautiful Rearus. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave in the comments. Otherwise, I hope you have a good time with update 41.